everyone. Welcome to HC Live. I see that everyone's already joined us. So welcome to a really special event today, how to set up, how to get an IEP or FO for your child, how to advocate for them. Today we have a really great panel of guests and experts. We are waiting for our other attendees to join. We like to give everyone a few minutes just to get settled in. So in the meantime, if you are joining from, whatever part of Texas, we'd love to hear where you're joining from, whether it's, if you want to say Houston, if you want to say specific neighborhood or suburb, we are all for that. So if you can go ahead and drop that in the chat, and we can kind of see where people are joining from. It's our favorite HC Live tradition just to see like where people are located. I see Chelsea is joining from Friendswood, Texas. I'm from the Clear Lake area, so very familiar with that part. And while everyone is just kind of getting familiar with the chat, we will have a time at the very end of our session today reserved for audience Q&A. So, we want people to get familiar with that chat feature, because if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, anything at all for either our host or our guests, please drop them in the chat. We're going to reserve some time at the end to address them. Just coming in with some other neighborhoods here: Boulevard Oaks, Spring Branch, the Woodlands. We were just talking about the Woodlands. That's fantastic. The Heights. So while we are all, again, waiting for people to join, I'm going to go ahead and start reading some of our guest biographies. We have a really great panel today. David DeMatthews is a W.K. Kellogg Endowed Professor at UT Austin. His research focuses on equity-driven school leadership, special education, systemic improvement, with particular attention to how school and district leaders support students with disabilities. It's fantastic. He's a former teacher and has served as the president of the University Council for Educational Administration. Julie Means Parker is a licensed dyslexia therapist and a longtime special education advocate with more than 20 years of experience working with students who learn differently. She holds a master's in education policy and planning from, again, UT Austin. We've got a lot of Longhorns here today. She's also a parent of children with reading disabilities and brings a dual lens, professional and personal, to the IEP and 504 process. And she currently serves as the president of Blex Education Technology Solutions. Derek Taylor is the co-founder of Special Education Advocates, which serves the greater Houston area. He has 10 years of experience as an educational diagnostician and 6 years as a teacher in Houston area Title I schools. His work focuses on facilitating IEP meetings, conducting assessments, and providing consultation services. And then last but not least, we have Alicia Tucker. She's a veteran educator and special education advocate with 27 years of experience in public schools, specializing in inclusive instruction and student services for children with disabilities. Her career has spanned K through education, working with students across the disability spectrum, including those with learning differences, emotional disturbances, and neurodevelopmental conditions. All right, we are at 12:03 today, so perfect time to get started. Thank you for everyone for chiming in where you're joining from. If you have any questions, again, for our experts or panelists, please drop them in that chat. I will be monitoring that throughout the event, and we'll have some time at the end for audience Q&A. I'm going to turn it over to Claire Partain. Claire is our journalist who covers student achievement, specifically focusing on HISD schools. She's a fantastic education reporter and just the perfect moderator for today's event. So Claire, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, as Jennifer said, I've been working on the education beat for a little over a year now. And even still, I get a little confused with some of the jargon, and it's a pretty intimidating process. So these experts today are some people that I go to when I need help on stories. So hopefully they'll be really great resources for you guys as well. So yeah, I'm going to start with the questions. This first one's for Derek. Summer is ending too soon, maybe for some, but for parents who have been reading with their kids or teaching, kind of trying to monitor their learning, what are some signs that their child might be falling behind, or it might be a good idea to keep tabs as school starts and maybe look for an evaluation?
So obviously you're looking for signs of regression or very stalled progress. Just listening to your child, and those are generally the things that you're looking for. But I want parents to really know that they should be trusting their intuition. individuals are going to show up with different signs that might be concerning. So parents, just trust yourselves and have conversations with experts and non-experts and investigate those concerns.
Yeah, and this question's for David. Child find is one of the first steps and legal requirements that schools have to identify students who are in need of services. So what does that process sort of look like, and how does a school recommend a child for special education evaluations? And if you're a parent and you maybe disagree with that, can you opt your child out of that evaluation?
This is a great question. Child Find is a fundamental aspect of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And what Child Find refers to really is the school's proactive duty to identify and evaluate students who may be in need of special education. So referrals can be made by anybody. They can be made by the parent. They can be made by teachers, doctors, other individuals. What's important for parents to know is that schools must respond to that referral within a 15-day time period. They have to get parents' written consent. And then once consent is given, there's a timeline. Before I answer whether or not parents, so parents do have the right to kind of say no, but what I think is important for folks to hear is that they're in Texas and in a lot of places in the United States, there's been these illegal delays or denials. We've had a very problematic cap on special ed in prior years that has led to some really significant dysfunction in how things play out in schools. And so I would just also want everyone to know that in some cases, incorrectly, school districts will wrongly insist or demand that a child goes through other processes before being evaluated. And the federal law is really clear. While like response to intervention or MTSS is really an important mechanism for effectively evaluating a child and understanding what their needs are, that can't be delayed. And so parents have a right to request that evaluation at any time. Schools must respond in writing, and then parents can always have the freedom to decline that evaluation. And that means, for the most part, schools cannot proceed and move further.
Yeah, that was a great shout out to the denied investigation. It's from before my time, 2016. So if you guys haven't read it, yeah. And so Julie, I think you might have some good insight here as a dyslexia therapist and a parent of children with learning differences. What are some of the most common learning disability students receive accommodations for in Texas schools? And what might those accommodations look like within the classroom?
Thanks, Claire. That's a great question. Our study from the University of Texas, we found that the parents often stated the accommodation process is quite challenging. So I'm glad that we're going to have this discussion around this. There are 13 disability categories under IDEA, everything ranging from autism to specific learning disabilities. And within that specific learning disabilities, you'll have sections such as like specific learning disability and written composition, reading comprehension, basic reading. And a few of those common accommodations would be everything from extended time, small group testing, preferential seating, audiobooks, text-to-speech, receiving copies to notes. But what I want to get across here is that something that's very important and that I help try to get parents to understand is this. An accommodation is directly tied to a student's diagnosis. The diagnosis identifies the specific learning need your child has, and that accommodation is a tool that supports how that need shows up in the classroom. So here's the critical part. The impact of the need should shape how the accommodation actually is applied in the classroom. So an accommodation can look very different school to school, classroom to classroom, teacher to teacher. And let me give you an example. So a common accommodation is preferential seating. If a student has ADHD, is diagnosed with ADHD, the need is that they need to limit distractions in order to maintain focus. So in this case, the accommodation of preferential seating doesn't mean necessarily sitting in the front of the room. It can mean if you have a teacher that's moving around the room or uses a screen at the back, or that front row placement won't benefit that child. Instead, preferential seating means the child needs to be seated at the point of instruction and away from distractions. Now, if we have a diagnosis of a student with dyslexia, Okay, then that student needs visual access to learning materials. So in that case, preferential seating would mean near the board. So I always ask a parent, or always tell a parent, ask this question: what specific need does my child have because of their diagnosis? And how will this accommodation be implemented in the classroom to support that need? You might find the counselor handing you a list of approved accommodations tied to your child's diagnosis. While this can be a starting point, it's just not the ending point. Each accommodation should be defined, aligned, and applied to your child's specific need. So that's why it's difficult to just say, this is what an accommodation looks like in the classroom. It needs to be tied to the student's specific learning need.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. That was great insight. And let's go a little bit deeper into IEPs, which are individualized education plans. Alicia, how are these tailored to individual students? What do they include? We might want to go into the basics of just what they might look like, and then how often are they reviewed or updated?
So Claire, IEPs are individual education plans. So it's for the child's unique needs. So basically, after an assessment, the parent, the teachers, the specialists, and sometimes the student come together in an ARD and they put together an IEP based on the student's strengths and needs. And that includes what we call a PLAF most frequently, which is the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. And the key there is they're present. It's a snapshot of what they're currently able to do. Not last year, it can't be copied and pasted, it's their present levels. Also, the annual goals are in the IEP, and those must be what we call SMART goals. They're specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, relevant, and time bound. And again, that they're based on that current year. They should not be copied and pasted from the last year. Also in the IEP, you're going to have special education services. So are they going to get speech therapy? How much time of speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy? That's in the IEP. Participation with non-disabled peers. So let's say that the child is in a different classroom, a specialized classroom. How much time are they going to be spending with children that are non-disabled in the non-disabled setting? And then piggybacking off what Julie said, in that IEP are the modifications and accommodations that are designed for the student. Key there is those must be provided with fidelity and consistent. They can't just be in the IEP and when questioned, the teacher says, oh yes, I provided all those accommodations. We need it documented. It needs to be, the teacher needs to be able to see that those modifications and accommodations in the child's IEP were indeed followed.
Yeah, and that was a great segue into our next question. So David, can you talk a little bit about the ARD committees that Alicia mentioned? Who sits on these committees? What do they typically look like? How often are they meeting? And what should parents and students know about their rights and their participation in that process?
Sure. So IEP meetings should happen at least annually if a child is already identified into special education. They could happen sooner in that timeline if a child is really struggling or there's some particular change where the committee needs to reconvene. The required members consist of the parent or guardian, the general education teacher, a special education teacher. There could also a school administrator or somebody serving as the school district's representative who has an awareness of both the curriculum and resources within the school, but also within the broader district. And some sort of evaluation specialist, like an educational diagnostician, somebody that's able to interpret results of any data, provide some additional expertise. Students certainly should be considered as members, especially as they get older, when that IEP team has to also engage in transition planning where the child's interests, the child's academic, functional progress are all considered in kind of planning what are those post-secondary outcomes. Other related service providers, a dyslexia specialist, say, any particular advocates. And when I was a school administrator and I ran IEP meetings, sometimes there were really key adults in a child's life besides just that parent or guardian that can be really helpful, provide a great deal of insight. Parents should know that within these meetings, they are viewed as equal decision makers in this process, that they bring value as advocates for their child and also as experts in their child. They should be knowledgeable about what's going on. They should feel comfortable asking questions of, say, an ed diagnostician that has very technical knowledge, or a teacher that is seeing the child every day in the academic setting that the parent might not know. And so parents really should be actively involved. And as much as possible, student voice should play a role throughout this process. When they're smaller and younger, obviously, they may not have the same degree of reflection and ability to communicate what their needs are, but as they mature and develop, their role should play an important role in that IEP meeting. Unfortunately, I would say IEP meetings are not run based on what the law expects. Instead, they tend to be very kind of top down, directed by the district, directed by some of the experts, the so-called experts or the technical experts in the room, where there's a pretty tight script. Educators and staff obviously are working on tight timelines. They don't just do one IEP a year. They often schedule them back to back to back. And so that creates a challenge for parents to navigate sometimes. But I think, as we heard earlier, this is supposed to be an individualized educational program that is very specific to that child. Sometimes it takes extra time. And so while it's not typically the case that these meetings are really engaging for parents, that's what the law expects. That's what best practice is. And I would argue that's what gets the best results. And so, just as a takeaway for parents here, I really want you to understand that it's Congress's intent that you're not just invited to the meeting, but that you're a key decision maker, and that your insights and your expertise related to your child, their strengths, their needs, the things you're seeing, are critical to creating an IEP that is actionable and is going to have a meaningful outcome for your child in the classroom and the school.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now imagine that we've got the evaluation done. We've had the IEP. Parents had a few ARD meetings and kind of getting a feel for it. Within those IEPs, there are progress goals for each student. So, Derek, what happens when students meet the progress in their goals, meet their goals within the IEP, and how often are they reevaluated?
Okay, so they're reevaluated every 3 years. It's a full and individual evaluation. Okay, all of those words are important. It's a comprehensive evaluation. I just want to get this in there. Anything that the parent, there are no problem parents out there that I've met. Okay, it's the staff's job to address concerns, and parents really need to feel listened to. Anything you have, any concerns regarding potential disabilities, really need to be shared with school staff, and they need to listen to you. Okay, so that initial evaluation, once that occurs, they reoccur. They're necessitated every 3 years to continue eligibilities and services. Okay, and the other part of the question, what do you do if there's been good progress, if goal progress has been met? It's a committee decision. You have lots of committee members, but as far as the formal decision-making process, there are only 2 votes: the parent and the school administrator. Those are the votes that count in terms of what's actually going to happen. And that's really important for parents to know, okay, because there are leverages that you have as a parent if you feel like you're not being heard. And again, I just want to reiterate, parents just want their kids to be okay. They just want to be heard. They just want practical solutions. I really appreciate the emphasis from the panelists on what's practical and what's going to work. Things should make common sense to parents. So, if the committee agrees and the student agrees and the parent is comfortable, and it's not a surprise decision, it's not sprung on the parent at the meeting, that's great if the kid's making progress, because all education should be based on educational needs. So if the student's educational needs are being met and they no longer require the services that they used to, everyone celebrates that. However, I do need to emphasize that, we get so many phone calls from parents that feel like they were dismissed or just provided window dressing or nice conversation, and then nothing actually practical is addressed to meet their child's educational needs.
Mhm. Yeah, and as you mentioned, there are a lot of times when parents might not feel like their voices are heard. David mentioned, a lot of these schools are maybe understaffed or they're booking things back to back to back, so things get missed and families might not feel represented. So Alicia, what should families do if the system isn't working as intended? Who do you go to first? Where do you kind of field those complaints? And then I guess we can go up each level of escalation if things, get more and more are still not addressed after talking to others.
That's a great question. First of all, I think it's to get that out there. It's so important to document. The parents document who they're talking to, when they're talking, what information they're getting. But they should, if they're concerned about their child's services or accommodations and modifications, they should first reach out to the teacher or the case manager on their campus, because that's who's most familiar with the student due to day-to-day implementation of the IEP. If they don't get results or the problem still goes on, they need to reach out to the school principal, let them know. If nothing's done, they're still not happy, and again, documenting all of these efforts, they should reach out to the special ed coordinator of the district. Many times the special ed coordinator is assuming that things are getting done, that the teachers and the staff are providing everything, following the IEPs. And so when you bring in the district special ed coordinator, they're not boots on the ground. So they don't know that these things aren't happening. So that would be the next person to reach out to. And if those steps aren't effective, then they can always file a complaint with TEA. I don't recommend that to be the first step. I think that parents need to go through these other efforts before filing a complaint, but they do have the right to file a complaint, and they would go through request a due process hearing.
That's kind of the final stop or final straw, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and so kind of in different parts of the process, families might want to hire an advocate, either to make things easier at the beginning, or maybe if there are some things that aren't going too well. So Julie, for families who have the means and resources to look for an advocate and hire an advocate, when is that a good idea? And then what kind of services do you and other advocates usually provide?
Claire, first let me emphasize that you don't have to wait for a crisis to bring in an advocate. I did share with you, and I think you'll probably share with our listeners, our attendees today, a list of organizations here in Texas that offer free to low-cost advocacy, and also parent education seminars. Worst case scenario, go educate yourself and still take someone with you to your meetings. And as Alicia said, begin the documentation process. I've seen a lot of the positive outcomes come from engaging an advocate early on before stress intervenes, as well as decisions have already been made. So I would definitely recommend that you reach out to an advocacy organization and obtain someone that can help walk you through this complicated system. Special education of 504 process that's filled with acronyms, shifting timelines, legal obligations, and sometimes it's not explained in plain language to parents. So it's important to have someone by your side that can direct you and help you really secure the services that you're trying to obtain for your student. Even if you don't take an advocate, I recommend that you take someone with you that can take notes, ask questions, just being emotionally supportive. A school cannot deny you to bring a support person. All you need to do is let them know that you have someone coming with you and who they are. And having someone there is actually really beneficial to you. And as you engaged, as David talked about, your job as a parent is to be able to meaningfully engage in this process. And if you have someone there to support you, and you feel that support, you're able to engage, and that just leads to better outcomes for our students academically and behaviorally. Oh,
Yeah.
and so a list of things that I think I did that. I said some of the things that advocates didn't do is everything from just educate. A lot of times I start with a phone call, parent, and just educate them on where they are in the process and what's going to happen next for them. Also, I help draft IEP plans, review evaluations, and attend the meetings with the parent, and just do everything we can to access effective supports for that child.
Yeah, absolutely. And David, we've talked about some of these changes that are happening within special education at length. So that includes, it's now official that all students with dyslexia are under the special education umbrella instead of the 504 plan starting this year. So do you want to talk a little bit about that change specifically, and then anything else that parents should know about that might be a little bit different this year and the next few years?
Sure. So as you said, under House Bill 3928, dyslexia is formally recognized um, as a specific learning disability under IDEA, which means if a student is found eligible in this area, they will receive special education rather than just the accommodations that were traditionally a part of dyslexia services. And so this is, in my opinion, there's going to be some challenges with implementation, but it's a positive step. It acknowledges that dyslexia is more than just a reading issue, and that it requires specialized instruction, regular progress monitoring, and when things don't go as they should, legal protections that IDEA provides to families related to due process. But there's a lot that families should know and be aware of, especially because a large system that serves 5.4 million children in 1,200 school districts and nearly 9,000 schools. It doesn't just change on the dime because the Texas legislature passes a new law. And so what families should expect is there potentially will be these formal evaluations that we talked about that are part of the special education process. There can be IEPs now instead of the 504 plans that parents received in the past. And then that children receiving services, if they're found eligible under IDEA, they'll receive those services from that specific specialized staff, special education teachers, other folks. I would anticipate that families across the state, across the Houston area, are going to confront some potential challenges. One, they might find that the team convenes and they don't find their child eligible, and so eligibility is not just guaranteed. They still need to go through an evaluation process, look at multiple forms of data, and so just because there was this diagnosis in the past does not automatically translate, and I think that can be something for parents to kind of struggle with. Parents should remember that they do have to give consent for this process. But the thing that I'm really most worried about is related to funding and staffing gaps with this policy, and really a lot of special ed related issues in our state. And so many districts are already quite significantly underfunded when it comes to special education. There was some change in the past legislature, but that change, which is a net positive for most districts, is nowhere near filling the gap that's what's necessary to even provide baseline level of quality across the board. And so this shift, it can potentially double or triple the number of students who are now eligible under IDEA to receive special education and related services. And schools are going to have to respond to that. So they're going to have to hire and train staff with a broad array of qualifications and expertise. And the Houston Chronicle has reported on this. Everybody has. There is a massive shortage of educational diagnosticians and school psychologists. Texas has reported a special education teacher shortage for over 2 decades. There's more and more uncertified, not even alternatively certified teachers. So there are some pretty significant issues confronting school districts that have very good intentions, but just don't have the actual resources to deliver. And that's going to be a very frustrating thing for parents. And there's also there has been so much legal and policy instability in Texas. A lot of states struggle with getting these laws right, but Texas has one of the worst histories, I'd say, in the United States of frequently passing, often contradictory policy that shifts special education, like that illegal cap that we talked about, continual changes to the dyslexia handbook, just this ongoing guidance that just confuses people. And again, in this big system with tens of thousands of teachers, when policies are changing and sometimes they're contradictory, people get really confused and it can be really hard to serve children well in that environment. And so just in sum, this change does mean students with dyslexia are more likely to be eligible for special education and related services under IDEA and not just accommodations under 504. But it also means families should be prepared for delays, for eligibility hurdles, to confront staffing shortages. And that's where I think we need a robust disability rights community, public education community, advocating, and journalists and other folks covering these issues, because obviously those voices have yet to been heard in our legislature, and that's something that needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. And I'm realizing we might not have dug into 504 as much as we could have. So I don't know if anyone wants to kind of explain that a little deeper, or just talk a little bit about, when you guys are on the ground, what are some frequently asked questions that you might encounter that, you'd like parents to know more about?
I'll jump in if I may. So the biggest difference between providing accommodations through 504 and requesting an evaluation as a parent is that, if you're interested in having more protections, okay, as David said, so many more protections, so many more opportunities to participate in meetings with educators, to build relationships with that case manager and empower that case manager. That's really the core of a person that provides leadership in meeting your child's educational needs. You really get so much more of that through special education if it's needed. If needs are already being met, or if needs can be met with some accommodations, great. There's no need for special education. But, we all know that oftentimes we get parents that are overwhelmed. They feel like they just don't know what to do, haven't been heard, are frustrated with all of these issues that we've been discussing. So in terms of the FIE, if you do feel like it's required, there are some things parents should know about the full part of that full and individual evaluation. So it's very comprehensive. As I said, everything that the parent is concerned about and shares is worthy of respect and investigation. So it covers sociological circumstances, communication, cognitive processes, behavior. It's not just an academic focus. They also are investigating needs for assistive technology. And if a parent even just suspects that their child has a disability in a particular area, I'm seeing some of the questions that are coming in. Parents don't necessarily, they might know something my child doesn't seem okay in this area. They're showing anxiety. I'm recognizing things that look like problems. But where does that fit in terms of disability categories? Okay, well, you don't have to understand. You don't have to be the expert as a parent. You just have to be an advocate. Okay, our jobs as advocates, I'm sure you all agree, is to find, and help nurture and support the best advocate there at the school for the child. So that the parent is filling this advocacy role. You just have to communicate with that person that you found is listening to you more than anyone else around. Okay, and that's when good things begin to happen. But it's also good for parents to, even if they suspect, some disability categories may be obvious, such as auditory impairments or visual impairments. But sometimes parents aren't exactly sure, but just talk through things with staff who are willing to listen to you. And you learn that ADHD is a disability under the other health impairment category. That eligibility essentially is provided from the doctor. Okay. And specific learning disabilities are another category. You have traumatic brain injury is another obvious one. And so on and so forth. You don't need to know every single thing about special education. You don't have to be an expert. And you can request an FIE at any time after you should exhaust, as we've all urged you, to communicate directly with staff first. Find that person that's the advocate at the school that your child attends, communicate with them. Once, if you've exhausted that process and you feel like you need to request an evaluation, there's nothing special or magical that needs to happen. And as David mentioned, they're required to give you back something in writing explaining why they're willing to test or not and evaluate or not. Okay, and parents should also know that once that process is complete, if you disagree, you can ask the school district to pay for an outside evaluations. And districts don't necessarily want you to know this. They often really don't contract enough outside evaluators. And the outside evaluators typically do a good job of an objective evaluation, although they may not necessarily know the means to best provide services in the district. So I'll just conclude saying there's a lot involved. It is complicated, but part of the complication is there by design. You don't have to be an expert as a parent. Trust your intuition and request an eval if you feel like it's needed.
Great.
And
Yeah,
can I
thank
just
you.
piggyback off Derek and say that a 504 it removes the barriers to provide accommodations. It's not a change in what the kids learn, but it's how they learn it. It could be a kiddo that has a broken arm, and for a period of time, if it's his right arm, he needs to have some sort of accommodation for a short period of time. So he would fall under the 504.
Yeah,
Great.
and to add some clarification, because there is a lot of confusion over 504 and IDEA in Texas, as David alluded to the time that we used to just classify kids under 504. So there's a lot of confusion for parents on the ground. They have this idea that in order to access special education, it must be like something very severe, which is not necessarily the case. But 504 is a civil rights law. It's rooted in civil rights, and the intent for 504 is just to create an equitized access to curriculum. That is why under 504, you're going to get a list of accommodations, and that is probably all you're going to access under 504. Where if you're able to go into this under IDEA, now you have not only the accommodations, but you have to show meaningful progress, you have to show growth. There's going to be recorded, there are going to be the records of the growth, and it's specialized. The intent of that is to receive specialized instruction. So like we were saying, you get a lot more protections under IDEA than you do under 504. But I like that Alicia mentioned you can access 504 like SHIP, just a broken arm, and you should if that's what your child is needing. Derek also mentioned this, the disability categories. And I think what I run into a lot from parents is in Texas, we have this process of identifying ADHD must come from a medical doctor. Specific learning disability has to be identified by the school counselor and by the FIEs. And so parents are left wondering when they receive the FIE, okay, it shows that they have a specific learning disability. And then they are told by the school district, oh, by the way, they might have ADHD, you need to go to your doctor for that. Same thing with autism. Autism is a medical diagnosis, so we have to go get that from a medical doctor. So sometimes there's confusion around even just that initial identification and process. Schools are not telling parents, you need to go to the medical doctor for this one. No, we can do this one in-house. So again, reach out to some of the organizations that I've listed. They'll help you in that process of knowing when you show up, you'll come with all your paperwork from your doctor, from everything that you need to attend that ARD in a position where you understand the child's diagnosis and can begin to form a very effective IEP.
Great. Yeah. Thank you guys for clearing up some of that confusion, and thanks for all of the insights so far. I'm sure I'll be rewatching this recording many times and taking notes. So, but yeah, thank you to everyone who's been submitting questions in the chat. I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer, and she's going to address some of those real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you again we're still monitoring that. If you have any other questions, continue to drop them in if you'd like. So I think someone submitted that question, what is the difference between IEP and a 504? So thank you for already addressing that. One interesting thing is there, and this is just kind of getting down to brass tacks, is there a specific process for requesting an initial IEP meeting? And how long should that process take reasonably from requesting a meeting to getting the IEP in place?
So before the IEP meeting happens, an evaluation needs to occur. Okay. And that they're given 45 school days. Now, the evaluation should not be rushed. That's a big problem. Honestly, a lot of the time it's an afterthought. And sometimes evaluators were not even informed or did not even know which suspected disability category was to be investigated. This is a problem, as we talked about, of staff shortages and overworked people. Okay, but so that needs to happen first, but there's no special process for that. During that process, that 45 days, good evaluators should be in communication with the parents. Okay, so parent surveys should be involved. Parent interviews, perhaps adaptive behavior surveys or other surveys if related to autism or other behavior surveys. And the parent should be apprised of what's going on. It shouldn't be a surprise when they end up at that meeting that you're asking about, that initial IEP meeting. Okay, there shouldn't be surprises going on there in terms of the evaluation process. And that's super important. There are great school staff out there who do a great job of communicating with parents. That's the number one thing that makes or breaks a child's education, is that relationship. So if that's not happening, there's a real problem. And unfortunately, there are a lot of real problems out there.
And I would add, just for FYI, parents in Texas, a school has 15 days to respond to your request for testing. I always recommend that parents put that request in an email in writing so that that date starts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's great. There is another question that came in through the chat feature. What are the options if a parent does not agree with the district's evaluation? For example, a parent thinks child needs speech services, but district says they don't. And Julie, why don't you go ahead and, or
I was gonna hand that to Alicia because she's really good.
Yeah, go ahead, Alicia.
Go ahead, Alicia.
And I thought, Derek, you would be great to answer this question. But like he mentioned earlier, if the parent doesn't agree, they can always request an independent evaluation. The problem with those asking for an independent evaluation, and Derek kind of mentioned it, the district has to supply who the providers are for the district, and there's very few. So when the parent goes to request this independent evaluation, it can take up to 6 months to get this evaluation because there's very few. So that's what I see is, I tell the parents, call immediately, call all these numbers to see when you can get your child in. But unfortunately, it takes a long time.
Yeah, an advocate, a friend going to the meeting as your advocate, I'll get calls from school staff that urge someone that they know, a parent, to call me. Okay, just getting some support from some sort of advocate is a way to iron out these things before they become the type of situation where you're requesting an outside evaluation and things are escalating from there. Because this is a process that involves relationships, okay, and there is a certain finesse that's required at times to produce the best results. But I do need to say the biggest mistake I see is parents that are, for whatever reason, I understand why, but are a little too timid, that haven't spoken up. You see that far more often than the parent that's that problem parent. That people that speak up, that squeaky wheel does not regret things as much as that parent that just kind of lets things go, things snowball. As Julie mentioned, it's better to address things directly now than to wait for stressors to build, because those stressors are building, in the child's work environment. Essentially, we all have no problems, imagining. We don't have to imagine what our work environment's like as adults. The stressors are growing for, the anxiety is growing for kids that don't have their needs met in just fundamental ways. And parents aren't asking for miracles. They just want things to make sense. And unfortunately, because of the system, there are lots of excuses for it, but the bottom line is just things don't make sense. And it's obvious to everyone except people that have career interests sometimes. It's obvious to the parents what needs to happen. So get someone involved is what I'm saying. Don't be afraid to speak up. That's a bigger mistake than
That's really great. And I think it kind of, to segue into another question, there was a question that was emailed in and a question that was dropped here live that kind of hit the same thing, is that, to your point about not wanting to rock the boat or be the problem, parent, or, there was someone who said that, like, they emailed this in, my child has ADHD, but she's had very understanding and wonderful teachers in the past. Thankfully, we haven't had a teacher who didn't get it. Should I bother with doing this? Should I bother? And there was someone else who also said, what are the benefits of getting this? It's so I guess my question is there, because this feels like a complicated process to some, what's some advice that you would give for these parents?
Having had watched my son go all the way from second grade all to 12th grade, I would say absolutely. You want to get the protections in place ASAP and not be dependent upon teacher, because just you have a teacher that understands, that's great. You hit middle school, now they have 7 teachers and the teacher has 125 students. It's very hard at that point to reel it all back in and go backwards instead of forwards. And so as soon as you can secure the rights for your child, I would do so. That's coming from a parent experience.
Yes. No, that's great.
Yeah, and to piggyback off Julie, you may have this year, you may have a great teacher that is doing all of these things and they're doing what's best for your child. But then next year, like Julie said, they may have 2 or 3, 7 teachers. So don't count on what's being done this year, because that may not be the way it is all through the child's career
And as
vocation.
David
And-
alluded to earlier, this process can also take quite a bit of time. So you don't want to be in a situation where you have a teacher who is not understanding and you're just beginning the process. You may be anywhere between 6 months to a year out from the help that that child needs. In the meantime, the child is sitting in the classroom misunderstood and not receiving the services.
Yeah,
That's-
and trust your intuition as a parent. I understand why some parents feel like it's a lost cause to communicate. By that time, they've probably exhausted most of their resources. Okay, but check the box, because as far as trust goes, because there are some people out there, make it a mission to find that advocate on the campus, to speak to the person that starts to get the higher ups to question how things sound to other people. Okay,
Yeah.
and trust that there are good staff members out there who will really go that extra mile for your kid. But unfortunately, we know it's not always easy to find.
Right.
So, but just trust your own intuition as parents.
That's great. All right. Moving on, because we have quite a few to get through. This is from a attendee in the chat. My grandson is autistic and now showing signs of ADHD and has speech challenges. He's entering the 2nd grade. Should he be evaluated by his doctor before he starts school or as soon as possible? I think my daughter was told he was too young previously, and I have also heard that too young phrasing with some children. So, advice.
He should be evaluated as soon as possible. I think we've said that.
Okay.
Even though he's 2nd grade, that is not too early. In fact, early identification and support are key to helping him succeed both academically and socially.
And
Is there anyone on the
You mentioned
planet
child
who's
find.
toughest?
Child find doesn't start at age 8. Child find starts from the minute that child is born.
Yeah, Julia, sorry, I was just going to say, is there anyone on the planet whose toughest age was not adolescence, going through puberty and all of that stuff? Okay, so if you're not sure if you're seeing signs of regression, of anxiety, if your child is telling you, negative things related to their school experience and getting their needs met, if you're on the fence at all, you may just want to go ahead and have the evaluation. Okay, circumstances do change. Not everyone that has a disability requires a label or services, but things do tear up. Pressures become much greater emotionally, behaviorally, in every way as adolescents progress through puberty. Okay, so it depends, but as panelists are suggesting, you're probably better off going ahead and having the evaluation done if you have concerns, if things aren't going well in school, and especially if you can identify practical, common sense ways that the educational needs could be met. Are there things that could be happening that are not happening through whatever means, just because classrooms are overcrowded or teachers are overwhelmed? If that relationship is not there between parents and school staff, better safe than sorry. I mean, the labels don't have, there's still plenty of stigma out there, but they don't carry the same stigma they used to. It used to be quite different. So please try to be open-minded.
And HIC, and HIC has come up a few times, so I'm just going to dive right into it. In HIC, general education teachers have a very structured timed instructional model is used. Teachers stated it is not possible to implement accommodations for students in this very, very strict time schedule. Therefore, teachers have been advised to choose a few of the identified IEP accommodations to implement in this timed instructional classroom format. Is this permissible? And this is coming from, I imagine, an HISD parent, but there was another question that was emailed in from an HISD parent saying, have leadership changes or, classroom changes at the leadership level influenced, enforcement of these plans in the classroom? And I wonder, I guess, Claire, if this is something that you could also help answer or to our experts as well.
Oh, David, go ahead.
I just was going to say definitively no. Superintendent Mike Miles, a new principal, a new teacher, none of them have the authority to override what's in an IEP without changing that IEP through the process that it is supposed to follow. A superintendent, a principal, a teacher deciding that they're going to change the way they teach something, that does not override that IEP. And so parents should immediately call that out. They have procedural safeguards given by the state of Texas. They can review that material. They should present that material. They should call for a meeting and follow suit. And so any school district that tries to play hardball tactics with parents around those things, or charter schools that try to play hardball tactics around those schools, which is also a big problem, especially in a district like Houston. They need to know their rights and know that that is not a reason that is justifiable.
Yes,
great.
teachers cannot pick and choose which accommodations they want to provide. And that's why I've said document it. So when you go into the ARD meeting, if a teacher says, oh, yes, I was providing all their accommodations, prove it, show it to me. Just saying it does not justify providing those accommodations.
That's great. One last question. Before we ask a question, I just thought this feedback from our attendee was just so lovely. Just thank you all so much. I've been with him. I'm imagining the grandson every day since he was born. I've watched his behavior change. It's overwhelming. He's my heart. We're exhausted. I think this speaks so much to so many parents that are going through this process right now. And I'm personally invested in it as well because I have a daughter going through this process. She's going into kindergarten this year, so I completely understand. All right, moving to our last question. This is rather interesting. I'm deciding whether this is emailed in. I'm deciding whether to put my child in private school when he enters high school in a few years. It's my understanding that all these federal protections do not apply to private schools. Is that really true? There are no accommodations at all for private schools, and I thought I'd share that too.
That's well, they're not required to do it because they're not funded. Some private schools will provide those accommodations, but it's really good for the parent to speak to the administrator first before they enroll their child into a charter school.
And does anyone know if this with school vouchers, private school vouchers going into effect next year, does that change anything?
So in the school voucher law, the Texas legislature included language stating specifically that voucher receiving private schools do not have to provide the federal and state protections under IDEA.
Wow. Okay.
And so they were very clear about that, even though it was sold by some voucher supporting legislators as something to help children with disabilities. They made sure they wrote into the law that they didn't have those federal civil rights protections that were fought for over nearly a century.
I would
Yes.
under 504, sometimes you have some rights under 504 if the school takes any federal funding. That can mean a summer camp or like a music camp that they offer. If they take a grant and they're and take federal funding, they have to at least offer the protections of 504. But yeah, not IDEA. So David is absolutely right on that. And
that's fascinating.
as a community, we took a hit with that.
That's fascinating. We will also, as a newsroom, continue to cover this, as I know Claire and her team has done so wonderfully in the past. So, all right, thank you everyone for making the time to join us. Thank you to our experts, to our parents and attendees. We really appreciate. Please follow. Claire, covers this subject exhaustively, and we're really excited to continue and have more of these HC Lives, hopefully. So. Thank you again for spending your time with us. Have a great day.